Okay, so I think we can start with our discussion. So today we will be speaking about the effect of pH on microbial growth. You very well know that pH, it's a measure of hydrogen ion activity of a solution, and it is defined as negative logarithm of hydrogen ion concentration, right? You also know that with 1 unit pH change, it is equivalent to 10 times change in hydrogen ion concentration, which means that if pH shifts from 6 to 7, it indicates that the hydrogen ion concentration in that sample has increased 10 times more. While if you talk about pH 6 getting converted to pH 5, or rather, sorry, pH 6 to pH 7 would be 10 times decrease in hydrogen ion concentration, and while pH 6 to pH 5 will be a 10 times increase in hydrogen ion concentration. So what I basically wanted to tell you that 1 unit pH change will be equivalent to almost 10 times change of hydrogen ion concentration in the sample. So on the basis of this, you classify the microorganisms into 4 categories. You have acidophiles, you have neutrophiles, you have alkaliphiles, and you have extreme alkaliphiles. So acidophiles, they are able to grow in range of 0 to 5.5. Neutrophils are able to tolerate 5.5 to 8. Alkaliphiles are able to tolerate 8 to 11.5, and any organism which can tolerate any pH between 10 to 14 will be referred to as extreme alkaliphiles, because it's very, very difficult for microorganisms to grow at such extreme alkaline pH. Okay. Now, when we talk about most of the bacterial species and protist species, they are neutrophiles. Let me tell you that as far as fungi is concerned, they love to grow at acidic pH anywhere within the range of 4 to 6. And photosynthetic protists, they normally like to grow in slight acidic conditions. And many archaebacteria, they are acidophilic organisms. Many species in the archaeal family, you will find have the ability to grow at very low pH, as low as even 1.5 and 2. Sulfolobus acidocaldarius, it is one of the common organisms that's found in hot water springs. Normally, hot water springs, they attain that temperature because of sulfur-based reactions, and involvement of sulfur here brings about acidic pH. So this organism can grow pretty well at pH of 1 to 3 and also can grow efficiently at higher temperatures. As far as the archaea, Ferroplasma acidermanus is concerned, or Microphilus oshemi is concerned, they grow even at pH 0 or very close to it. That's between 0 to 1. But yes, every organism has a limit to their tolerance. You cannot expect it to have a very broad range of tolerance. They have an optimum, and they normally tolerate pH very close to that optimum only. So any drastic variations can affect their cytoplasmic pH. And if cytoplasmic pH varies, then that could be really very problematic, because this leads to disruption of plasma membrane. Also, you have to understand that all enzymes that are responsible for metabolic activities, they require a specific pH at which they can work. At an optimum pH, only the enzymes will work. So if the cytoplasmic pH gets affected, which is not close to what the enzymes need, then metabolism is going to get disturbed. Okay. Moreover, in extreme pH than their optimum, most of the proteins, they lose their structural conformation, and several membrane transport proteins can also get affected, which thereby affects the flow of nutrients and several other ingredients in and out of the cell. Please understand that most of the prokaryotes, they would die if the internal pH drops as close to 5 or 5.5. They cannot tolerate drop in their cytoplasmic pH. बाहर भले ही pH change कितना भी क्यों ना होने दो, अंदर का cytoplasmic pH जो है उसको constant पर बरकरार रखना, maintain रखना, ये बहुत जरूरी है, क्योंकि अगर cytoplasmic pH एक point से गिर जाएगा, then nothing can be done. The changes in the external pH also might alter the ionization of nutrient molecules and thus reduce their availability to the organism. Okay, so this is the most important part, that mostly when there are changes in pH, the nutrient molecules, they get ionized, and ionization होने के बाद उसका uptake होना थोड़ा सा difficult हो जाता है, and thereby it affects the availability of those nutrients to the organism. So you have to understand that change in pH is not just affecting enzymes and transport proteins, but it is also going to affect several nutrient molecules, thereby causing hindrance in the entire uptake process. Now, what are the adaptation strategies? So microorganisms, they are going to try to maintain their cytoplasmic pH close to neutral, whatever may be happening outside the cell, whatever may be the pH outside the cell. They will try their level best to maintain their cytoplasmic pH close to 7. Okay. Now, most of the organisms, they see to it that their plasma membrane is not easily permeable to protons. Okay, so it might be impermeable to protons or very slightly permeable to protons, so that if there is excess protons outside the cell, they should not be able to enter the cell and affect the cytoplasmic pH. So normally the cell membranes, they are not very permeable to protons. Neutrophiles, they have this tendency to exchange potassium for protons. So if protons are coming inside, what the neutrophiles do is that they make use of an antiport system. You very well know what an antiport is. Antiport transport system is wherein you take one nutrient inside and simultaneously at that same point of time, you are putting another component out of the cell, right? So if A is coming inside, B has to go out of the cell. So what these neutrophiles do is that they exchange potassium for protons. Okay, so they take in potassium and they pump out protons. Extreme alkalophiles like Bacillus alkalophilus, they maintain their internal pH close to neutrality. And how do they do that? So they are going to exchange internal sodium ions for external protons. Okay, so in this scenario, we are talking about alkalophiles. So alkalophiles, matlab, these are organisms which are growing in alkaline pH. So if they want to not allow alkalinity to raise in the cytoplasm, they will have to get protons from outside. Exactly ulta in case of, acidic or acidophiles or neutrophiles, where in acidophiles or neutrophils, they try to eliminate the protons. Alkaliphiles normally try to take protons inside themselves in exchange for sodium, so that they can maintain their cytoplasmic pH far away from alkaline and keep it in the neutral range. Many a times, organisms also have components which act as buffering agents, which will see to it, or which will resist any changes in the pH of the cell or of the cytoplasm, basically. But yes, if the external pH varies drastically, then the cells will have to adopt several other strategies. For example, if the external pH becomes too acidic, you will see that other mechanisms will come into play. For example, when pH drops below 5 or 6, you will see that Salmonella, Enterica, Cerova, Typhimurium, and E. coli, they synthesize an array of new proteins which are part of acid tolerance response. So what is acid tolerance response? Please understand, students, that when the condition becomes acidic, too acidic for the cell to tolerate, these organisms will produce a definite set of proteins which they do not produce otherwise. These set of proteins are part of acid tolerance response, because these proteins will give them the ability to tolerate the acidic conditions effectively. Okay, now which proteins will be part of this acid tolerance response? So one could be a proton translocating ATPase, wherein they are going to pump out the protons out of the cell so that they don't accumulate inside the cell. Okay, so these ATPase, which are membrane proteins, they will see to it that all excess protons are being removed out of the cell. And in this process, they can even make energy, okay, in the form of ATP. If external pH decreases to 4.5, or lower, then you will also have chaperone proteins. As I've told you earlier, chaperone proteins, the word chaperone itself stands for guide. So these are those proteins which will act as acid shock proteins or heat shock proteins, wherein they will not allow the enzymes and other important proteins of the cell to get denatured. They will see to it that the protein structure, the protein configuration is not getting affected in any way. Okay, so they will not allow proteins to be denatured, and even if some proteins structure has got affected, they can guide those proteins to refold themselves. They can guide those proteins to organize themselves once again. Now, going ahead to metabolic activities and pH, please understand that pH of a cell, of its cytoplasm, can get affected even due to metabolic activities. It depends on what is the ability of a microorganism. If a microorganism has the ability to produce acidic end products or alkaline end products, it is obvious that once these end products start accumulating inside the cell, they will start affecting the pH. Fermentative microorganisms, they have the tendency to break down carbohydrates to form organic acids. Whereas if you talk about chemolithotrophs like thiobacillus, they have the ability to convert sulfur-based compounds to the level of sulfuric acid. So you can imagine that if sulfur is being converted to sulfuric acid, it's surely going to increase the acidity of the cell, isn't it? Other organisms, they normally tend to make their environment alkaline because they are bringing about degradation of nitrogenous based compounds like nitrogenous bases or even amino acids or some other nitrogen based compounds, by which they are generating amines, they are generating ammonia, which is all going to make the pH alkaline. Now, as I told you that some organisms, they normally have, naturally they have some buffering agents inside them, like some would have phosphate salts in them. It could be sodium phosphate, potassium phosphate based salts, which will act as buffers. So buffers are basically those components which will resist even slightest change in the pH. Okay, so even if, in presence of a buffer, you introduce a little bit of acid or alkali, you will see that the buffer doesn't allow the pH of the medium to be changed beyond a specific limit. Okay. Similarly, when you are growing microorganisms in the lab, you can incorporate buffering agents in the medium. You can add buffering agents to the medium, wherein you can make use of, say, some peptides, some amino acids, some buffering salts. Okay, so that this organism has a tendency to produce acidic or alkaline metabolites, and you don't want those metabolites to affect the pH of the medium. So you can surely introduce buffering agents into the medium when you are growing the microorganisms in the lab. Okay. Now here you can basically see different examples of microorganisms which grow at different pH, and to make you understand that what all components of the environment exist at these pH, they have given you examples also. Then you can see that at 0 pH you have concentrated nitric acid, and at that pH you have ferroplasma and Picrophilus oceanae, which can grow very well. So similarly, at different pH, what are the different organisms that can sustain themselves, can survive themselves and grow effectively? This has been put up in this particular chart. Now we are moving towards the last factor that we have studied in the last semester, which is on effect of solutes and water activity. So now you are quickly going to tell these answers, because we had discussed this multiple times in multiple contexts in that term. So anyone who can tell me the meaning of hypertonic solution, you are going to raise your hands so that I pick up people who will answer this. So raise your hands if you know the answer. Hypertonic solution. Anyone? Only one person knows what is a hypertonic solution. Others? Come on, you have to develop the confidence in you guys. You all can do it, I'm pretty sure. Sanskriti, can you please unmute yourself and tell me what is a hypertonic solution?
Yes, sir. So in a hypertonic solution, the solute concentration outside of the cell is very high.
Very good, excellent. So anyone who can tell me what is a hypotonic solution? Raise your hands, all those who can tell me what is a hypotonic solution, please raise your hands. Okay, Satyam, can you tell me what's a hypotonic solution? Please unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. Sir, hypotonic solution is one in which the solute concentration is greater inside the cell.
Okay, excellent. It's greater inside the cell, which means it's low outside. What about isotonic solution? Anyone raise your hands? Vedika, please unmute yourself.
In isotonic solution, the solute concentration outside and inside is same.
Excellent, very good. So I'm sure that you all remember that when you put a cell into a hypotonic solution, what is going to happen? Anyone raise your hands? What is going to happen when you put a cell in a hypotonic solution? Zoya, please unmute yourself and tell me.
It can burst.
Why would it burst? Go step by step. Why would it burst? What would happen when you put the cell first in a hypotonic solution? Yes, Krutika, can you answer?
Water starts to go inside the cells.
Very good. Water starts moving inside the cell. Okay, so that's called as endoosmosis. So the cells will swell and there is a chance that if the concentration difference is very high, what would happen? The cell is going to burst. And
Yes.
what's that process called?
Plasmolysis.
Plasmoptosis. Very good. What would happen if you put a cell in an isotonic solution? Anyone? Yes, Aditi?
There will be no flow of water or solution.
Very good. So there's going to be no net flow of water when you put it in isotonic solution, correct? What would happen when you put the cell in a hypertonic solution? Yes, anyone? Soham? Yes, please go ahead.
The cell will get dehydrated and it will shrink.
Right. So the cell will lose its water. It's going to be dehydrated. It's going to shrink. I hope you remember that swollen and shrunken. We had used two terminologies for this. Swollen cells were called as?
Turgid.
And shrunken cells were referred to as?
Flaccid.
So if all the water moves out of the cell, we had discussed what would happen. Do you remember that? If all of the water moves out of the cell, what's going to happen to the membrane?
It will tear open.
Very good. It's going to tear open, and that process is referred to as?
Plasmolysis.
Excellent. I'm so happy. Plasmolysis. So do you remember I had given you a hypothetical situation that if someone adds the cells accidentally into a hypertonic solution and realizes the mistake, what should they do to save the cell? Yes, Sakshi?
We can put it in a hypotonic solution for a while.
Excellent. And what is that process called?
Deplasmolysis.
Deplasmolysis.
Very good. Very good. Great. So you know almost all of these things. So microorganisms in hypotonic environment, they have to see to it that they maintain osmotic balance in their cytoplasm. That's the most important task. How do they do this? Okay, how are they going to see to it that their osmotic balance is maintained? So they can make use of inclusion bodies. So inclusion bodies are wherein they will fill those vacuolar structures with water and solute and try to excrete out all that is in excess inside the cell. Or they can make use of mechanosensitive channels. These are channels in the cell membrane. So they can open them up. Both bacteria and archaea have such channels. So they can open them up And when the cell is in a hypotonic environment, as too much water starts moving inside the cell and the cell starts swelling up, they open these gates. It's just like dams. What happens when there is too much of rain and there's a scare that, you know, the dam walls would burst open? They just open some of the gates of the dam, right? And they let that excess water move out of the dam. So the same thing happens here in case of such turgid cells also, जिसमें बहुत सारा पानी चला गया है, and there is a chance that ये अब swell होके burst होगा. ऐसे circumstances में cell जो है ये mechanosensitive channels को open कर देता है ताकि उसके अंदर जितना भी पानी गया हो वो सब बाहर निकल सके और cell को burst होने से बचाया जा सके. Okay. Now, because many protistants, they do not have a cell wall, they may also use contractile vacuoles. Contractile vacuoles are excretory vacuoles, and they will see to it that all excess of water is filled in it, and contractile vacuoles excrete that excess water out of the cell. Now, please understand that most of the microorganisms, they also would try to maintain osmotic balance by making use of special chemicals. What are these special chemicals? They are called as compatible solutes. What are compatible solutes? So whenever there is, you know, a hypertonic environment wherein there is a lot of solute concentration outside and the cell fears that it's going to lose all the water, it tries to accumulate a lot of compatible solutes inside it. Because these solutes, they will try to hold the water, and it will also try to bring up the solute concentration inside the cell equivalent to what the concentration is outside. Okay, and these compatible solutes, they in no way interfere with your metabolic activities or even with growth, even if they are in much higher concentrations, which makes it possible for the microorganisms to accumulate or synthesize these compatible solutes and keep their concentration much higher inside the cell. Now, what are examples of compatible solutes? So you can see choline, betaine, proline, glutamic acid, other amino acids, even elevated levels of potassium ions may be, you know, as compatible solutes to increase the internal cytoplasmic concentration. Okay. In case of photosynthetic protistants or fungi, they make use of sucrose, or they may make use of polyols like arabitol or glycerol or mannitol. It's just that what normal bacteria use, maybe that may not be used as compatible solutes by protestant fungi. Polyols and amino acids, they are considered to be the best type of compatible solutes because, you know, they in no way will disrupt the structure and function of any protein or any enzyme. With salts, normally it's a big fear because as the salt concentration increases, they can very well interfere with the protein and the enzyme structure. And if the structure is affected, you very well know that the function is also going to get affected. So it's very, very important to understand this, that polyols and amino acids are much better as compared to any other components to act as compatible solutes. Now, you very well know that organisms which love to grow in presence of NaCl, and that to high concentrations of NaCl, we refer to them as halophiles. So if an organism loves to grow in presence of NaCl or the other salts, which is near concentration 0.2 molars, we refer to it as halophiles. But let me tell you that there are microorganisms which are so adapted to extreme salinity or extreme salt concentrations, wherein they can tolerate anywhere between 2 molars to even saturation level of concentration, which is around 6.2 molars of NaCl. Okay, so such organisms which can tolerate such high concentrations of salts is referred to as extreme halophiles. Now, the Archaebacteria, Halobacterium salinarum, is one such example. Okay, it has been isolated from Dead Sea, which is a salt lake between Israel and Jordan. Also, the Great Salt Lake in Utah or other aquatic habitats where, you know, salt concentration is very high, especially marine environments, you will be able to see several extreme halophiles existing in those environments. Now, please understand that such extreme halophilic organisms, they tend to accumulate a lot of potassium ions inside themselves as compatible solutes to maintain osmotic balance. Otherwise, they would get dehydrated and they won't survive for long. The internal potassium concentration, because they are accumulating potassium inside themselves, could be as high as 4 to 7 molars. Okay, and they have undergone a lot of adaptation in order to maintain their enzymes, ribosomes, transport proteins stable in high potassium levels also. Because normally any organism with such high concentration of potassium, their proteins and enzyme structures will get very easily affected. But that's not the case with these extreme halophiles, because they have been adapted in such a way that all these components can be stable and can retain their activity even in presence of high potassium levels. In addition, you will see that the plasma membrane and the cell wall of halobacterium, it is itself having a lot of sodium ion concentration. Okay, and sodium is an integral part of their plasma membrane and cell wall. And if sodium is not present, you will see that their cell membrane and cell wall, they lose their integrity, and it doesn't take much time for it to disintegrate. While extreme halophiles, they have successfully adapted themselves to environmental conditions which are so extreme that any other microorganism would have perished in such an environment. If you pick up the normal lab strains like E. coli and Bacillus and try to grow them in such saturated salt environments, you will see that it doesn't take even few minutes for them to be destroyed. So you have to understand this, that these organisms have been blessed with adaptations which helps them to maintain their osmotic balance and survive in those conditions, right? So now they have become so specialized that these organisms, you cannot grow them in normal conditions. So if you vice versa, if you get some extreme halophiles from marine conditions to the lab and try to grow them in a lab medium, you will see that these organisms unfortunately now cannot grow in normal conditions. They need that kind of high salt concentration because all their mechanisms, all their metabolic processes, all their cellular components have been, adapted in that manner that they cannot survive without salt anymore. So you can see here, it is shown that a non-halophile can tolerate anywhere between 0 to 1 molar of salt, while a moderate halophile can tolerate a broader range from say 0.5 to 3.5 molars. A halotolerant organism can tolerate anywhere between 0 to 3, because as the name suggests, halotolerant, they normally grow in normal environments, but can tolerate salt. And extreme halophiles are the ones which cannot grow at lower salt concentration. You can see that their growth itself begins from 2 molars and they can grow at very high salt concentrations. Okay. Similarly, it's very important to understand the concept of water activity, which is abbreviated as small a and to the base W. So this water activity is 100th relative humidity of the solution. It is defined as the ratio of solution's vapor pressure to that of the pure water. And I've told you always, what you should remember is that when you have pure water, all water molecules are free to interact with any chemical substance. When you add a spoonful of salt, water molecules now start interacting with NaCl. So now you don't have free water molecules like you had earlier. You may have very few water molecules which are free, and maximum of them would be engaged in interacting with the salt molecules. So as you go on adding more and more amount of solute into pure water, you will see that the number of pure water molecules will go on decreasing. And there will be a point wherein you are not left with any more pure water molecules. All of them are engaged in interaction with some or the other component. That is the point when you say that you have reached saturation, because now if you add anything that will not dissolve in water, it's going to just settle down at the base. So water activity is very, very important for microbial growth. Please understand that if you talk about bacteria, it needs a very high water activity. It prefers somewhere between 0.97, 0.98 of water activity, it needs a lot of pure water molecules, because only then it can, water is the base for all metabolic activities, remember. And if you don't have enough water available, it's going to be very difficult for the microorganisms to grow and survive. Okay, so you have to understand that for a microorganism to grow at low water activity, it will have to spend a lot of energy. It will have to spend a lot of ATP in the process. Okay, so Staphylococcus aureus, it is halotolerant, and it can be grown in a media having salt concentration up to 3 molars. Okay, that makes it even adapted for growth on skin, because normally Staphylococcus aureus is found on human skin. The yeast Saccharomyces rauxi, you can see, grows in sugar solutions wherein there is a lot of sugar present and the water activity could be as low as even 0.6. So fungus, they can grow with very low water activity, but that's not the case with bacteria. Bacteria struggle to grow in conditions where the water activity is very low, but fungi can very effectively thrive in such environments. If you talk about photosynthetic protistin, Dunalila viridis, it tolerates sodium chloride concentration from 1.7 molars to even a saturated solution. Okay, so as I said, that most microorganisms, they need water activity close to 0.98 or higher. Okay, but if you are going to have lower than that, it's going to be slightly difficult for other organisms to grow, but fungi surely can tolerate it very well. Now, this is the basic reason why we add salt and sugar and we use them as preservatives so that the food doesn't get spoiled. Because when you add more of solute, either in the form of salt or sugar, you are reducing the water activity, you are reducing the number of free water molecules. And if the number of free water molecules is reduced, it is pretty obvious that the cells will not be able to grow. So that prevents the growth of microorganism. And that's the reason why in foodstuffs like jam and pickles, where you have a lot of salt or sugar, you will see that only fungi are able to spoil it, and bacteria are unfortunately unable to spoil it, right? So this shows you the water activity of different environments in which organisms can grow over there. So you can see that even fungi can grow up to 0.60 water activity. Below that, as close as 0.55, you will not be able to see any microorganism to grow at that water activity, because DNA gets affected, its structure gets affected at such a low water activity. So 0.6 is the cutoff point. Beyond that, you will not be able to see any organism growing. Okay, so yeah, that marks the end of all the factors that we had discussed in the last semester. And now we come to the factors that are new to us, which we are supposed to discuss in this semester. So just give me a minute to open that presentation and cast the screen to you, and maybe we should be able to at least cover one of those, if not both. So just give me a minute to do that. So I will post both of these presentations for you to refer. But once I finish the both the factors, I will post it. Okay. So let me tell you that every single organism which is living on land, which is on the surface of water, they are always subjected to a pressure of 1 atmosphere, okay, which does not bring much of a difference, because that is not a very significant pressure. So it doesn't affect us in a major way. But organisms which live in deep sea, which you can say depth of 1,000 meters or even more, where the pressure of the water, which we normally call as the hydrostatic pressure, could reach to as high as 600 to 1100 atmospheres. Imagine we are exposed to 1 atmosphere of pressure, which we are saying is not very significant. But think about these organisms which live in the deep sea at such depths, and they are being exposed to as high pressure as 600 to 1100 atmospheres. And here the temperature is like 2 to 3 degrees. I mean, it's not just one hurdle, but another hurdle also coming in way, because you're not just dealing with such high pressure, but also at the same time, the temperature here is going to be low. But still many organisms, including several of our prokaryotic organisms, are able to survive at such depth. And such organisms are called baro-tolerant organisms. Baro here stands for pressure. So these organisms may be able to survive in normal conditions at lower atmospheric pressures, but they are able to tolerate higher atmospheric pressures also. Not like other organisms which thrive in normal conditions, but they cannot tolerate pressure at all. They would give up. Aisa nahi hai inka. They can tolerate higher pressures. But some prokaryotes, they are barophilic, which means that they cannot grow in normal conditions. They like to grow only in conditions where the pressure is very high. Like microorganisms which survive in the gut of deep sea invertebrates. So already these invertebrates are at higher depths in the ocean. Usme bhi, these microorganisms are inside their gut. So you can imagine the pressure is going to be double on them. So, microorganisms which are in shrimp like crustaceans gut or sea cucumbers body, these are true barophilic organisms. They can love to grow at high pressures. Rather, they would grow only at higher pressures. If you bring them to normal conditions, you will not be able to cultivate them at all. Please understand that these microorganisms have a lot of environmental significance also, because they contribute thoroughly in nutrient recycling. You have studied in the last semester in the second paper about biogeochemical cycles. You have studied how microorganisms are so important environmentally. They have such a big ecological significance wherein they contribute to recycling of the nutrients and returning the nutrients back to the ecosystem, so that they are ready once again to enter the cycle. So these microorganisms in the deep sea also have a lot of significance when it comes to cycling of the nutrients. Now, a barophile has been recovered from the Mariana Trench near the Philippines at about a depth of 10,500 meters. And let me tell you that this organism, it is unable to grow at pressures as low as 400 to 500 atmospheres also. 400 to 500 is much higher than what it is on the land. But even at such 400 to 500 atmospheres pressure, if this organism is not able to grow when incubated at even lower temperatures like 2 degrees, you can imagine that how habituated or how adapted they are to higher pressures. It's not just a single organism. Let me tell you that you have barophiles coming from several bacterial genera, including Photobacterium, Shevanella, Colvelia, even some archibacteria, which are even thermobarophiles, which love to not just grow at higher pressures, but also at higher temperatures, like Pyrococcus species, Methanocardococcus genasci organism. These are all organisms which are thermobarophiles, which means that they not just grow at high pressures, but they love higher temperatures too. Okay, so I think that was about the pressure. This aspect of pressure you will find, I think, in Brock, but you can also check Prescott 7th edition. But Brock surely mentions about the effect of pressure. So that's very short and sweet, not very complicated for you to understand. Okay. Now, I will not get into radiation for a basic purpose that first, I have some things to discuss with you. And second, it's a big topic and it will not end in next 10 minutes. So it's preferable that we start it tomorrow. But as I said, that there are some things to discuss. So we will discuss that first. And if then you have any questions, you can ask those questions and we can then disperse. So first and foremost, if you have seen the Google Classroom, you would have seen that there was a notification a week ago about test. I hope you all have seen that.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So the paper is scheduled to release tomorrow morning. I have already set and scheduled its release on Google Classroom tomorrow morning itself. So you will get tomorrow's entire day, Sunday's entire day, Monday's entire day, because Monday midnight 12 is going to be the deadline by when you have to attempt that exam. You very well know that it's the first section of the unit which you have to attempt. It's a 30 marks paper. You will have 1 mark question, 2 mark question, or even 3 marks question. I would recommend that before you answer the question, please also pay attention to the marks that are allotted to it, because marks normally are mentioned very close to the question itself. Read the question and the options very, very carefully. If you have to do some calculations, please do it on a paper and then give it a thought, then select your alternative. Do not make a hurry. If possible, time yourselves to do this. You should be able to attempt this paper in 45 minutes. So when you are attempting this, please time yourself. I know that many people may not pay attention to this and may just take forever to solve that paper. That's not going to help you, because you very well know that in exam, when you prepare everything and go, the time is such a factor which, plays its role. And many a times, because you spend a lot of time in thinking, the time just goes off. So it's a time for you to practice, wherein you set your time and you give the exam. So try doing that. Also, once you submit the paper, you will be able to see the answers, see where you have gone wrong, note that for yourself. And in the next lecture, whenever we meet, post Monday, obviously, after the submission deadline is done, if you have questions regarding any test, you can ask that during the lecture. I may not solve the entire paper with you, but if you have any doubts in specific, we can surely discuss that, because it eats up a lot of lecture time, so I don't want to do that. But if you have any doubt in specific, you can surely bring that up and we can have a discussion on that. There is no problem at all. Okay. Other than that, I've been noticing that the department has been organizing talks by alumni, but I have seen that the turnout from the F5 batch is not very great. See, please understand that you are getting such opportunities. These are also the, seniors who will help you tomorrow to understand which institute to get into, which institutes are good, what are their plus points, what are their minus points. It's just that you're a part of this entire big family of RUIA alumni, and you should take advantage of that. So please see to it that you're not missing out on talks just because you are bored to attend them. You never know when an opportunity knocks your door. Okay, so it's really very disappointing for us, because we arrange all these things for you guys, and if your turnout number is going to be so low, I don't think that we would be investing our time in arranging such talks for you all, because it then doesn't heed to the purpose, right? So I would request that you make it a point to attend these events and listen and learn from people's experiences. That matters a lot in the long run. You will never know whose experience and whose words are going to influence you to the path that you wish to choose. So please don't do this to yourself. And I hope that I will be able to see many of you in today's talk also. Okay, so with that, I will stop for today. If you have any questions, you can ask or you can start disconnecting.